Tuning of karma beyond the material realm. Sounds very juicy to me. Our speaker has been in New Thought and this pursuit of these ideas for 57 years. He has a plethora of things that I can't read on his bio. Oh, there's a lot here. I really can't read it though, but I do know he does dream work. He's been a friend of circles for decades, probably since the beginning, I would imagine, very close to the beginning of circle. And okay. Anyway, I would just like to welcome Ken Kaplan. Thank you.
So everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Does everybody hear me okay on Zoom?
Yep, you're not.
So the genesis of this talk happened about almost a year ago. But the kind of semi-genesis of it happened in the last 6 months. I go on YouTube a lot, and I like to look at, I get into cycles of what I call deep dives into things. So right now it's non-duality. But there was a time when I spent some time with fine tuning. And I looked at about 30 or 40 videos from all different angles about what it is. Fine tuning is actually fairly recent in science and physics. And they've kind of discovered that there are 26 physical constants in the universe, such as gravitation and the way it works, the weak force, the strong force, electromagnetism, the relationship between the distance between the electron and the nucleus. There are all these things that are held in balance in the universe. And there's like 26 of them. And what they found is that if any of these, one of these things, or a small amount of them deviates from a very small window, the entire structure falls apart. So they tend to talk about it mostly in terms of like that it creates conditions for life. But it's more than that. If certain things are out of balance, the universe would have inflated too fast and exploded. If the things were unbalanced in a different way, it would have never gotten off the ground. So it's held in the universe is held in this critical balance physically. And you can see by watching these videos, there's a lot of consternation among physical scientists because it points to the big D word, design. And they don't really want to go there. And they're, I swear to God, it's like a dog ate my homework. They're desperately trying to get an explanation because they kind of, there's a general agreement. There's some outliers, but there's a general agreement that it's true, but they don't know why. We know why, but they don't know why. I mean, the best explanation they can come up with is, well, the probabilities are so small within the universe we know that there's this super universe that nobody knows about that's spitting out random universes all over the place, and that increases the odds that we end up being the lucky one. And I don't buy that because so I thought that fine tuning was a very good way to start this because I began thinking about fine tuning in the non-material realm, in the subtle realm, in the spiritual realm. And I found that there's fine tuning everywhere. I work with dreams, and I'll say, for me, dreams are incredibly fine tuned, but we're going to not deal with that today. So what I wanted to do is deal with the fact that I started looking at karma and reincarnation. And I've always been into this for a long time in a very intensive way, but I began to look at it more intently in terms of the nature of what I call the fine tuning of karma, which I hope today's talk will give us some understanding about, that there is a precision in the way in which this works out. And I'm going to start with a story that got me into all of this. Years ago, about 25 years ago, a friend of mine who was a poet I was pretty close to, he called me up and he was very distressed. And he wanted me to come down to Rittenhouse Square Park and meet him because he told me, I'll tell you what, when you get here. It turned out that a very young friend of his, 23, a young woman, had been murdered in Center City at her job. He was beside himself. I mean, he was just flipped out. And, it made no sense. And how could this happen? And I'm walking with him, and it's way above my pay grade. And I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, the cylinder of light comes down and descends upon me. And I hear myself saying, because it's not coming from me, her life had a soul contract in which she would sacrifice her life so that the meaning and the nature of the preciousness of life would be imparted in a very powerful way to those around her that needed this lesson. And all of a sudden, this peace came over me. And not only did it come over me, but it leapt to him and enveloped him. And he completely calmed down, like your friend, Priscilla, like your friend. Which, by the way, is what I learned was showing up is 80% of life. That's a beautiful example of just showing up. And so, and he calmed down because the energy calmed him down. The idea that there was some reason and purpose behind what happened calmed down. And he said, I don't know where that came from, but I think it sounds true. Well, I had no idea what a soul contract was. At that time, we kind of now know, I'll say it right now, kind of, a soul contract is that before we are born, it's called pre-life planning. We, as connected or one with our higher self, which is the God, we craft a contract for our life. In terms of in tune with our karma, in terms of the next stage of what we're going to do, what are going to be all the main events and situations and people in our lives, our bodies, our intellects, our families, our culture. We design all that. These are our destiny pieces we put in place for ourselves. And we leave some wiggle room, this is my opinion, for free will. So it's not all destiny and it's not all determination. So everybody has this contract, which means that everybody in the world has a purpose, a very specific purpose. And the point of the contract is that they're very specifically designed. And so we come in and we don't realize, so you have an accident at a certain time, or you meet the person you're going to be married to, or you have your family. All these things are things that are set in place. So that we learn certain lessons, we have certain experiences, and we have opportunities for growth. So at that time, there was no literature on it. Or I mean, in terms of the internet. If you went on the internet at the time, there was nothing. Now you go on the internet on soul contracts, it's everywhere. You get hundreds and hundreds of websites. But at the time, there was nothing. There was one book, Journey of Souls, by Michael Newton. A great classic. I recommend everybody read it. Excuse me a second. And he started to put all this in context. He was a hypnotherapist who had over 2,000 sessions, not of past life regression, but of life between life regression. And the technology of what's behind the veil began to become apparent as to what's going on. This is why I can never be a Buddhist, because Buddhism misses all of this. It's great. Buddhism is a phenomenal thing, but it has areas of weakness. And this event in my life rerouted me. Begin a very serious investigation of what I call afterlife studies and the technology of consciousness. And I began teaching classes on it and telling people about this whole idea before it became, I was a little bit ahead of the curve. This is the other great book, 2009, Robert Schwartz wrote Your Soul's Plan. He took 10 people who had incredibly difficult lives, and he showed through a number of psychics and what they gleaned exactly what the crime. You want to get down to precision, because exactly what is crafted. So what happened was, about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, before I moved, I started having a very deep appreciation and gratitude for the difficulty that I went through in my early life. I had cleared enough of the trauma, still dealing with it. But I cleared enough of the trauma to understand, to be really grateful. I want to share a little bit very quickly some of the detail because it's important. There's so many of us who suffered abuse and difficulty in earth life. So I don't want to make, but what I've learned in terms of fine tuning is that the way in which the universe comes together to create the conditions that will fulfill the current contract are unique, like a particular imprint or song for each person. For me, the way it worked out was, and I'll tell you why it happened in a reason. My mother came down on me like my mother was a rageaholic. She had so much unfinished business from her child. And she had terrible boundaries. So she was terribly invasive. And when I was 4 and 5 years old, she would trap me in the car and rant at me for an hour at a time. Now, my mother had very powerful energy. So it's like being hit constantly. And this just didn't happen once, it happened consistently over 2-3 years. So this created in me deep dissociation. It also created in me OCD and post-traumatic stress at a very young age. My father was autistic, and a very powerful incident when I was about 3, when I wanted to stay up late and be a big boy. So he flew into a rage and kept me awake for 9 hours and wouldn't let me go to bed. Next morning, I went downstairs and shoved my hand through glass and nearly killed myself. So, and to show how severe for me this trauma was, because there's also part of my contract is the genetic line of my mother's side is filled with mental illness and hypersensitivity. I had a therapist who once said, "You just don't have any shock absorbers." So he said things that a lot of people have thick skins about. I don't get riled. You take personally, talk on the radio, and you'll get, and then the OCD kicks in, and you'll be going like this a long time about it. It was so bad that I ended up torturing animals at 5 years old. Now, I became an early childhood specialist. And I know that when a child is at that stage of distress, that's one of the worst stages of distress that a child can be, that the trauma that they're experiencing, because I didn't even know why it was a compulsion. So I already had OCD at 5 years old. And it was a compulsion. It wasn't now back there in horror, but I kind of forgive myself because I didn't know any better. But it showed the level of like what my system was not able to take. And there was a kind of a desperation for an outlet in cruelty. So, and then, of course, when I got older, I went to college and I landed right in the middle of the most violent university in America, the University of Wisconsin. The police came in and beat the crap out of students in a demonstration. There was tear gas all over the place. When Nixon invaded Cambodia, the kids fought the police in the streets for a week, and they shut the university down in May, gave everybody pass fail and said, go home. And I knew a guy personally, a good friend of mine, was part of a gang that blew up a citywide building. And unfortunately, he was the youngest guy ever on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. So I go from the frying pan into the fire, you know. And so you might say, how can you feel grateful for all of that? But I've cleared enough, and because of my work with soul contracts and becoming more aware of the fine tuning, I understood what the lessons were and why I needed what I got. Because what a lot of people don't get is that old Rolling Stones song, you can't always get what you want, but you'll get what you need. And the universe is brilliant. It is absolutely precise and precision. They're giving everybody exactly what they need down to the micrometer. Now, there is a caveat here in a second. But here's what I look back and realized why I was necessary. I think in some past lives, I've been a pretty bad guy, a Genghis Khan kind of guy. And very, very, I went through with Matt Penner, and I got a really deep intuition. I was one of those fire and brimstone preachers in the 1600s in the New World, you know, like late 1670, and caused a lot of distress with people, you know. So I think this is not the first life I've been paying off some of this stuff That's kind of the culmination of it. But I realized a couple of things that were very valuable lessons. The first was I learned the consequences of cruelty, or I reinforced to myself and in order for us to learn these lessons, it has to hurt. The idea that we want to be nicey, that's not the way it works. This is a profound experience. It may not be real in the absolute sense, but it has great meaning. Meaning and purpose are different than real in terms of absolute reality, which is a whole other thing. So for me, I had to experience a very, very deep pain, a very profound pain, in order to get the lesson of the consequences of cruelty. This also allowed me to start to really have empathy for people in the world, and particularly people who were not at the top of their game. Jesus worked so much with the underclass and the peasants. And so I started really having empathy for people who weren't strong, and I think America struggles with this. America struggles with empathy because it values achievement. If you don't have achievement, then you're not worth it. And this drove that out. I also learned compassion because the severity of the trauma was buried so deep, I couldn't just snap my fingers and get out of it. I mean, I go on Facebook and you might as well be with 1,000 Wayne Dyers every day for giving you the nice look. But there's also a lot of spiritual bypass that goes, And it gave me compassion for myself and compassion for others. The trauma at this deep level is not something you get over so easily. And it could take a lifetime to do it. And I think because it has been so difficult for me to get a handle, I didn't know I had OCD. I mean, really, not severe OCD, but strong, moderate OCD. Obsessions and then compulsions. Until I just talked to a therapist 3 months ago. And he gave me a test. None of the other therapists have ever been picked up on. And he picked up on it. And he said, you got it, it just clarified so much for me. And so because of this mother's side of the family and this genetic weakness, which was programmed in, it was really incredible that I learned compassion. And then also it created space for me. It cleared the table for me that the only thing that was going to pull me out of it was my relationship with God. And that forced me into a much deeper relationship with God than maybe I would have had. And I see this with a lot of people. I see it in their contracts that when they go through certain kind of spirit is pushing them to go deeper. I see it a lot. I've gotten very intuitive at being able to read people's contracts and kind of get a sense of what's going on. So there was profound gifts that came out of this incredibly difficult beginning. And up until the time I had a very bad nervous breakdown, the acute phase of 7 years. I was in and out of hospitals. I lost my sanity. I was delusional. I didn't start recovering until I was about 37, went back to work. And I built myself up, but it took years and years. And there have been levels and levels of shedding layers of this. So when we look at just my life, look at all the things that had to be put in place for my country. My mother had to have her parents and her lineage and her experiences that would lead her to unload on me. My father had to have all his stuff that would lead on that. I had to be born at a certain time, in a certain place, in a certain culture. Now, one of the great strengths I got was my physical body. That was to offset that the emotional stuff was going to be just really haywire. There had to be the genetic line on my mother's side. Everybody has mental illness on my mother's side. We're talking about, so we're dealing with a whole bunch of these things. And then the timing of running into the war and the timing of incarnating this person. So you have all these elements just for one person. If you look for the woman who was murdered, not only did she have all those things, but then she had a contract with the guy who killed her that was done before she was born, and he didn't show up at the right time. So if we're looking at these, we see that there's enormous synchronization going on at levels that are way beyond. We talk about synchronicities a lot. It's a big deal in the New Age. Well, imagine at the time you're having a synchronicity where the perfect song comes on the radio at the time you need it, or all the synchronicities that happened in this incident over here. Imagine that 3% of humanity, which would be about 300 million people, are having synchronicities at the very same moment you're having synchronicities. That's how fine-tuned all this is. It's the whole thing about the precision I felt about the way it was set up in my family that delivered to me exactly what I needed was just incredible. But it happens for every single person, every single creature. It's so far beyond our capacity to fathom. So there are a couple of things here. So synchronization of it is one thing. I also want to be clear that because we understand these things does not mean that we disavow humanity. That there's a lot of spiritual bypass that's going on these days around coping with trauma and what it means. And I've learned through this that it's very important to acknowledge that what trauma means on the psychological level. I saw a non-dual teacher on YouTube, and he was all over this thing. And he said, I can't. A lot of non-dual teachers that everything is one, and they're not devotional, and they're not talking about this. That like there's one thing, and so you separate out the idea of God and all this. It's all a unitive force. And he said a lot of these teachers think they can deal with trauma when they can't. And he said, I know my boundaries. He said, I know that trauma has to be dealt with someone who's a trained specialist and there's skilled training in it. And someone who's a spiritual teacher most likely don't have that skills. But oftentimes they'll dismiss the trauma. So I find there's a lot of spiritual bypass happening. But one of the things I felt about that the word quantum is thrown around a lot of spiritual circles in ways that aren't appreciated. Quantum this, quantum that, quantum this, quantum, and they don't know what they're talking about. But there's one thing I do think about these contracts and karma and reincarnation. And I think I want to say quickly that the soul contract is the mechanism by which karma and reincarnation is executed. And I'm going to get into something that is the piece that puts it together. So now we know in a very detailed technological way, because that's part of the gift of our civilization, how this works beyond what the Tibetan Book of the Dead has, which is like 2,000 years old. So it's quantum in the sense that the universe operates on probabilities. And so not only is it precise, but it's not deterministic of the precise. It is precise in that the probabilities that are made for you, our bodies, our parents, these are like tree trunks that can't really be moved. But we come to choice points. So therefore, the way I like to look at it is a giant oscilloscope. And it's constantly adjusting to itself while it's doing all this stuff. So if someone's making free will choice over here, it's impacting the whole. Everything's constantly adjusting in this miraculous way. So therefore, it's all a sense of probabilities that are going on, and therefore nothing is determined. I read something from Jesus on Shelly Channel recently. He said, the future for you has not been decided for America. He said, you can have a small wobble, you can have a really big wobble. A lot of it depends on what you bring to the table. So it's probabilities. It's not all set in stone. The ascension, it's like, yeah, it is, but you have to do your part. And the other thing I felt was really interesting. This is what I've come to believe. How is this all packaged? What is the mechanism by which the divine packages all this? I call it assemblage. God is not a particular entity. It's way beyond that. But God also doesn't think in the way we think. God created thought and uses thought for us. If we get guidance, we'll get downloads and we'll get telepathic communication. But the way in which the universe, the higher power works, is it assembles things. But it assembles things at a level that is so far beyond. So this package of assemblage at so many different levels, so if you're Rich Bocconi said to me, we like to have an image of anthropomorphizing the process. We're sitting in a room somewhere on the other side and we're scripting out our contracts. Maybe not, I don't know, I haven't been there. At least, I can't remember. But he said it's more like a wave that passes through of understanding and knowledge. And what happens is when the ideas of what has to happen to karmic circumstance happen, the universe assembles everything needed as a way of just putting everything in place. So it's assemblage, and we see it all the time. If we look more closely, but the packages, as I said, are assembled with this incredible precision for what everybody needs. So therefore, we have to look at well, what is the value of this beyond theory? I think on the individual level, the value is quite apparent. If one can look at one's life and understand why these events happen, why did we put them in place? How did this facilitate my growth? How did this clear karma? There's so many ways of looking at it. Also, it allows us to see behind the scenes that what's going on. Let me tell one very quick story to illuminate this from a book by Dick Stupin, who's a medium. A woman's son had been killed riding his bike. He was 20 years old and she was beside her. She was such a joy to be with. And she just could not get over it. So she went to him. He contacted the soul. And the son came to her and said, he was laughing. He said, "Look, Mom, I don't want to minimize your pain, but I want to give you context about why I had to die." He said, "In my last life, I was a prisoner of war in a prisoner of war camp. In my next life, I'm going to be a leader with I needed a vacation life, but it couldn't be too long. It was like, when you're on vacation, it's not your whole life. So my vacation life had to be short, and, I was on the edge a little bit. I wasn't bad or violent, but I was a little bit of a rascal, and I loved it, and I had a great time. I loved to ride my bike, so that's how I chose to go. This was a vacation life. So, it's nothing is senseless. One of the things I've seen with a lot of people is how can a loving God allow these things to happen? But when you see behind the veil, we see that at the deepest level of all these things, even the worst of, that's why I picked that song. You notice in the song, it's not just the good stuff. Oh, bless all those that cause us pain. Bless the thunder, bless the rain. It's not just all good, it's bless everything. Because at the heart of everything that everybody goes through is a profound love. And that's the core of it, to come to understand that. So if we can see behind the veil, we say, oh, it's senseless. How could this happen? And all of a sudden you get the story, oh, it makes perfect sense. And that's the way it's working on every level. There's nothing out of place. Now, my fine-tuning of my karma is that it's just all coming back to me in spades. I got on Medicaid, I got food stamp, I got all this stuff, and I got into Grundy Hall, where it's subsidized housing. I'm only paying $375 a month for rent, all my material. That's like the universe said, I'm going to take it. God said, I'll take everything away from you in the beginning. It's going to cause you enormous pain. And my guru came to me in a dream and told me it's going to happen. But at the end of it, I said, now you get it all back. And there's no guarantee for that. People say, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No, sometimes what kills you kills you. Because that's your contract. And that's another form of bypass. So I want to end this with two things. One is one of the great values. I do workshops with this with people, and I can tell you the burdens that are lifted off people when they go through a process of examining their lives and claiming more power, understanding there was reason and purpose for everything, even some of the things that were worse for them. And the other thing is that we're living in a very difficult time collectively. Right now, everybody is just having a very whether you're on the right or on the left, it doesn't matter. Everybody's going nuts because it's so turbulent. But if we take this fine tuning of karma, countries have karma as well as people. And nothing here right now in the collective events is happening by accident. It's all fine tuned. Now, I have my own reasons why I think it's happening. The other day I looked and saw how perfect it was that Marjorie Taylor Greene is in power right now. Because there was a huge probability that we were going to get here. Is there someone that is what her soul is contributing at the level it is, was born in 1975, was going to come to power right now? There's going to be the synchronicity because that was needed. And so for me, everybody has their own take their spin on it. My take is this is my. I mean, Jerry Falwell felt that Katrina was, because the homosexuals guy was angry, they punished New Orleans. So you can believe that if that's your theory. That's not. I personally think that America, as a dominant power of the world in the last 70 years, has exported tremendous atrocities to the world. Vietnam, Iraq, Reagan in Central America. Reagan killed 300,000 people in Central America, innocent people on anti-communist jihad. We have exported fascism. We have upended democratic governments. That all had to come back. Okay, well, this is the end. Okay, so that all had to come back. And so what I do when I get really upset, like with the Supreme Court this week, but they backed off giving them immunity, was I have to remember what I'm preaching now, which is to go into and say, you know that this is part of the fine-tuning of all this. This is something we have to endure, and nothing is out of place here. Nothing is out of place here. There's a Zen saying, no snowflake ever falls in the wrong place. So I want to end with a poem. Can I end with this quick?
Sure.
Okay. So in doing that, we gain strength to deal with external circumstances, even on a collective level. Okay, this I saw on Facebook the other day. Today was the absolute worst day ever. And Joe tried to convince me that there's something good in every day. Because when you take a closer look, this world is a pretty evil place. Even if some goodness does shine through once in a while, satisfaction and happiness don't last. It's not true that it's all in the mind and heart, because true happiness can be attained only if one's surroundings are good. It's not true that good exists. We sure can agree that reality creates my attitude. It's all beyond my control. And you'll never in a million years hear me say, today was a very good day. And then at the bottom, they say, now read it from bottom up. Because it shows how perspective changes everything. Not only just in terms of our thoughts and all this stuff horizontally, but understanding the greater way in which this fine-tuning happens. Today was a very good day. And you never in a million years hear me say it's all beyond my control. My attitude creates the reality. I'm sure you can agree that it's not true. It's not true that good exists only if one's surroundings are good. That happiness can be attained because it's all in the mind and heart. It's not true that satisfaction and happiness don't last. Some goodness does shine through once in a while, even if the world is a pretty evil place. Because when you take a closer look, there's something good in every day. And during time, try to convince me that this was the worst, absolute worst day ever. Wow. So it's all.